is tea so popular?
I don't know. Iced tea.
Loudly enough.
Ice cube. Ice is very popular.
I see.
Melted.
I see.
How was it? How was it?
No. Oh my god.
Can't hear you.
No, he hasn't.
I'm just like,
Do
you want to stay to the crowd? She's my
Yeah, I know. Yeah. No. No, I got something there.
Yeah.
Do you want to sit up there in front with me?
Oh, are you?
I don't want to sit up there by myself.
Okay, let me get my.
Are you still involved? How was it?
It was.
What just happened?
It was good. What happened? I'm not going to go through Come on. I talked a lot to Ralph and Kim from New Jersey. She was really nice. All right, Ellie, remember to think about speaking up. Yes. No, oh, yeah. Hell no. You're right. I'm right next to the mic. I'm ready.
I'm speaking up. On a related note to what we were just saying, check out what my friend said. Luke, Jeremiah, Michael Biddle. Yes, that's a great movie. Oh my god, it's hilarious. Hubert Hammer's great. You're into Hubert Hammer? Shabbat Shalom, fucker. It's a brilliant book. It's really good. Awesome. When you type this even turn to Google, the third link that comes up is the IMDb. The what? The Internet Movie Database. What are you acting? I don't know, but find out. Excuse me, oh, of course. Predator, Running Man, Wolf Guard, Tag, Demolition Man, Major League 2, Batman and Robin, Abraxas, Guardian of the Universe, Ricochet, Underground. This is brilliant. Alright.
I think you should get to like I love to be Running Man. Wow.
You're great in Underground.
I like your man. Defender of the Universe.
Wait, no, what is that? Yeah, Abraxas, Guardians of the Universe.
They never really said it should have been a problem.
Guardians. Where?
Can I come down there? Those seats? Can I come? What part was he in? Practice?
I don't know. I could have moved on. I was actually trying to find a real bio. It's surprisingly difficult.
So I'm talking to Chris Carter. You know Chris?
Yeah.
And talking about campaigns. Something Howard Dean. I don't know. We should go ask Judge. Why? No, really. It's here. Bring up the director. What's Howard? He's like, who's before you were your speaker? Now. He said, I'll give you a second. He's here. He goes, oh shit, for real? He picks up the number. He calls. I go, what do you think you're going to say to him? So he picks up the phone. He goes, I don't know. Turns out he didn't pick up the phone. What were you going to do for this?
Hi. It's the worst. How's it going?
He's going to say, I want to introduce myself. That's not why.
Take a professor to lunch then. I'm so doing that.
Take every professor to lunch every day. That way you won't have to pack lunch.
Exactly. That solves your crisis.
Professor to dinner. Take a professor to Dunkin' Donuts.
All the munchkin to a professor. Sticks out.
Serve a function.
Nope. Amazing. Just blast up.
I guess that's what I'll go around.
That's a function. That's right. Plastics is a function.
Thank you. There we go. Apparently Arnold really likes it. Think about it. All those movies, they're all Arnold movies. It's starting in Predator.
Yeah, they're both.
Running Man.
Now they've both been Arnold.
Who's Batman and Robin? Was Arnold too, wasn't he? He was a freeze. Arnold was really the fight.
LaMarche is a genuine, honest, working-class ticket for the Green Party.
My name is Mike Perutka, and I'm running for President of the United States.
The fact is, he can't win.
I dare to dream that we can put libertarians in federal office.
Does this country belong to only two parties?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. The Institute of Politics is delighted to sponsor this event tonight. I'm Phil Sharp, director of that institute, and I want to welcome you to our Party Crashers, Independent Politics in America. Our event this evening is done in conjunction with the premiere of the PBS documentary, Crashing the Parties, which will air on public television stations across the country later this month. Here in Boston, it will air on WGBH's Channel 2 at 8 o'clock on September 30th. The format for tonight's event is the following. I'm going to just make some brief remarks introducing our panel of folks here. We will intersperse some elements from that documentary prior to being shown. It'll be shown here. And then we will discuss that. We will then open it up to your questions for the panel. First, let me introduce the members of our panel. We're delighted to have with us tonight Teresa Amato. She is the National Campaign Manager for the 2004 Ralph Nader presidential campaign, which is the largest third-party campaign in this election cycle. Previously, Teresa has served in leadership roles in two of Ralph Nader's nonprofit public interest groups, Citizen Works and Public Citizen. She also, as I suspect you know, was Ralph Nader's campaign manager in 2000, a campaign that by a number of journalists was acclaimed as a very effective one. She's a native of Itasca, Illinois. She graduated with honors from here at Harvard College in 1986, where I'm pleased at the Institute of Politics to tell you she was then on the Student Advisory Committee at the Institute. And she has a law degree from New York University. And even more importantly, she came back to be with the Institute of Politics as a fellow in the year 2002. Next to her is Elaine Kamarck, and she's a lecturer here at the Kennedy School of Government in Public Policy. She had a considerable career in politics. In the 1980s, she helped bring about reform within a major political party. She was involved in the New Democrat movement, which helped nominate first and then elect Bill Clinton to be president. She then went to the White House, where she helped work on major reforms within the federal establishment. Namely, she headed up, managed, and aggressively pursued the National Performance Review System, better known as Reinventing Government. And in the 2000 campaign, she worked as a senior advisor to Vice President Gore's campaign. Here at the school, she does research on 21st century government, the role of the internet in political campaigns, homeland defense, and governmental reform. And she teaches courses on 21st century government, innovation, and electronic government, difficult courses to get into because of her popularity. Elaine Kamarck has a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley. Next to her is Darren Garnick, who is responsible for our capacity to have this style of foreman tonight, because he is the senior producer at Award Productions, which is a documentary production house based here in Greater Boston. He spent last year traveling, as you will note if you see the entire film later this month, across the country and creating this documentary. He is a zealous political junkie, and among his memorabilia, I'm told that he likes so much is a 1964 can of Barry Goldwater soda, which was called the right drink for the conservative taste. He has a Jesse Ventura air freshener and a Kuwaiti Americans for Kerry button. And he lives in Amherst, New Hampshire. Next to him, probably requiring the least, if any, introduction, is Governor Jesse Ventura, who brings his new look, and which probably would have made him more popular than he already was when he crashed the party in Minnesota. He crashed two political parties there and became the first Reform Party candidate to win the governorship of of Minnesota, much to the shock of and chagrin of the establishment, who decided that maybe who discovered the people wanted more choices. Prior to his service as governor, he had been a mayor of Brooklyn Park in Minnesota, the 6th largest city in that state. He was formerly a Navy SEAL and Vietnam veteran, and of course, as I suspect you might know, he had an 11-year career, a successful career as a professional wrestler. Something I, as a recovering politician, would recommend for anyone who wants to get into American politics. He also, I'm very pleased to say, was a fellow in the spring of 2004 here at the Institute of Politics, and a very popular one at that. Well, let me just briefly say a couple words without dominating the conversation here about our two-party system. We tend to describe it that way as a two-party system, and yet those who know American history know that third parties have played a very significant role at various points throughout our history. Indeed, the Republican Party began as a third party back in 1854, and within 6 years had elected a president of the United States, and you know the history since. It is now one of the well-established two parties. Jumping well ahead over a number of other experiences to 1948, President Harry Truman faced the bolting within his own political party of the so-called Dixiecrats, Strom Thurmond, who wanted to fight against some of the policies to begin integrating America, and presented a major challenge within the Democratic Party to the re-election of that president. Oddly enough, his vice president also, Henry Wallace, sought to run as a third-party candidate, and ended up making Mr. Truman look more moderate, and some say therefore more acceptable, and of course you know Harry Truman was re-elected. In 1968, the Alabama Governor George Wallace, of course, bolted the Democratic Party, ran as an American Independent Party, and received nearly 10% of the vote. There are Democrats who believe that he siphoned off critical votes that ended up electing President Nixon by 1% of the popular vote during 1968. And of course, in 1992, closer to home, H. Ross Perot, the founder of the Reform Party, the version of it that exists today, put deficit reduction on the national agenda when in the public debate he forced both President Bush and candidate Clinton to address the issue in significant ways. Indeed, some people believe that this put the Clinton administration on the record to make it a high priority in ways that it might not have been had it not been for his candidacy. He, of course, won 19% of the vote, the largest vote drawn by a third party since Theodore Roosevelt back in 1912. And of course, many Republicans today believe that Bill Clinton was elected and beat the incumbent President Bush only because of this third party candidacy. Well, most often what happens to third parties in the country is the issues they raise, if they have significant appeal to Americans, they get absorbed by one of the two political parties or the other. And this has happened from issues such as emancipation up to child labor laws and on. And I mentioned the deficit. Sometimes they are major impetuses to what many of us would describe as positive change. Sometimes they arise as a way to block a change that is greatly feared, as was the case in 1948 and 1968. But tonight what we're going to do is try to discuss the role of those parties, but of course we're bound to talk about the election as it is this year because it has great significance to us. So with that, let's run the first clip and get to it.
Walk into a large room and you divide the room down the middle with people, you realize half of them are potential customers. Half of America is not voting. Can you imagine if you tap into 20% of that? You'll win easily. Easily.
A third party in American politics, the term means any political party other than the Democratic and Republican parties that is trying to break in to the political mainstream. People have done opinion polls asking people if they would like to see a third major party alongside the Democrats and the Republicans. And the percentage of people who say yes ranges anywhere from 40 to 60%. There's generally a feeling that it would be a good thing if there was more competition, if there were more voices.
Well, with half the public not voting and with them showing strong sentiment that they want more choices, I guess the question is what does that say about our political process today, and whether or not independent parties and the ones that are out there at the moment can have an impact on this? One of you want to take that on as a starter?
I'll start. I know this isn't Antiques. The microphone's freaking me out here. I know this isn't Antiques Roadshow, but I brought one of my political souvenirs with me. This is a coin from 1980, and I know that visually it's not a good prop, but just bear with me here. On one side of the coin is Ronald Reagan. On the other side of the coin is Jimmy Carter. And this is meant to pick the president. If you're undecided, you go into the polls, 1980, you flip a coin, you pick the president. In the fine print on the coin, it says, "If coin lands on edge, vote Anderson." Now we all know the odds of the coin landing exactly like this, and that's the perception. The perception is that third-party candidates can't win. And along with directors Al Ward and Peter Kozel, I spent the last year on the trail with third-party candidates. The perception is that they can't win, and because of that perception, we pretty much had the campaign trail to ourselves. And tonight, I'm hoping that on the panel and through discussion with the audience, we can explore why. Why do people ignore third-party candidates? Why do they struggle to even get their message out?
Well, do they make a difference in terms of getting people to vote? I mean, what was your experience in Jesse in Minnesota when you ran?
Absolutely, third parties make a difference. You know, Minnesota and Maine traditionally lead the nation in voter turnout in the last 2 to 3 decades. It's always a battle between Minnesota and Maine. Who is going to have the highest percentage of voter turnout? Minnesota's won, I think, the last 4 or 5 in a row. But clearly, and my argument is this, who are the 2 states that had elected independent governors? Minnesota and Maine. So it clearly shows you that when offered a third choice, you're going to get a higher voter turnout, because Minnesota and Maine have proved that. Now, let's flip it over. You go to Minnesota today. Tuesday, we had our primary. It was the lowest voter turnout in Minnesota history, because there's not a dominant third party anymore in Minnesota that's applying any pressure. So they had a 6% voter turnout on Tuesday, the lowest in history. And then to give you a backup of what's happening now in Minnesota, because it was a primary, the independent voters chose to stay home. Because in a primary, you go there and you tell what party you are, and that's the only ballot you get. So the Independence Party, which I belong to today, had no opposition. So there was no reason for independents to go vote. Well, they found an old antiquated Minnesota law that says if you don't get 10%, you can't be on the November ballot. They've now wiped out all 26 independent party candidates in the state of Minnesota, and at this moment, they will not be on the ballot. Is that America? Is that what I went in the service to defend? Parties, and this is the Republican Secretary of State teaming up with the Democratic Attorney General to exploit this in Minnesota and wipe 26 candidates off the ballot in November. You won't even be able to vote for them. And we in the Independence Party already have 4 to 5 mayors in the state of Minnesota. We're gaining, see? And so now there has to be a concentrated push to stop us.
But Jesse, can I ask you, if I'm a citizen in Minnesota and I feel I'm independent, can I choose to vote in the Democratic or Republican primaries to help make that choice on who's nominated?
Well, yes, you can. But in the primary, you can only choose one of the, one of those parties. If you're a true independent, why would you go there and vote for a Democrat, or why would you go there and vote for a Republican, especially in a primary?
Well, one of the reasons people do is because they want to see, they want to affect the outcome, and they find they can do that.
Well,
admittedly,
I think that's such a minority of voters that it really is insignificant. I don't think anybody goes there with an intention of saying, you know what, I'm going to go against my own personal viewpoints. If I'm a Democrat, I'm going to ask for a Republican ballot. I think you'd find most people, their hands would shake.
Well, the only reason I say that is because one of the ironies of American politics is most of us say we want more choices. The place where we have the maximum number of choices almost always is in primaries, where it's in many states very easy to become a primary candidate. I myself ran when I first ran for Congress. There were 7 of us. The party establishment was against me, but I could get on the ballot. People could easily draw a ballot, a Democrat or Republican ballot, and vote. And yet the turnout remains low there. I'm not challenging you that the third party might help on this, but there are obviously other things that are affecting this. Elena, excuse me, Teresa, were you going to say something?
Yes, a lot of people don't identify with one or the other parties or think that both parties are broken in this country and that both parties need to be fixed by an outside third party or independent candidacy. Picking up on Governor Ventura's point, it's not always a function of the strength of the third party or the independent candidate, and oftentimes it's the function of the system and how the system obstructs third parties and independent candidacies. For example, you have 51 different ballot access laws in this country for federal elections. It's an insane process just to be able to get on the ballot. And these election laws are written by who? Democratic and Republican legislatures, general assemblies in the states. And they are designed in large part to keep choice down. So almost in 1/3 of the states, you have unheard of barriers just to get on the ballot to provide voters a chance to have a different kind of choice. So in some states are notorious for making it very difficult for third parties and independent candidates to get on. And in particular, we're finding that this year.
Well, and then let's talk about debates for a moment. If you want to go to what is, in my opinion, it makes you want to throw up. Now, for those that need a little recourse in history, here's what happened. 92, when Perot got 19.7% of the vote, that scared the hell out of the Democrats and Republicans, because all of a sudden there was this third entity that was a player in the game. What did they immediately do? Up until 92, all your federal presidential debates were conducted by the League of Women Voters, which in essence was a neutral group. Well, after 92, the Democrats and Republicans in Congress passed congressionally, took the debates away from the League of Women Voters. They formed this fraudulent, phony debate committee, which is headed by the former heads of the Democratic and Republican parties, which is nothing but a rubber stamp for the candidates of these two parties. Case in point, when Perot ran in 96, now I didn't support him because we had Colorado Governor Dick Lamb ready to go, and the Perot people came in, but that's here nor there, inside party politics. But a deal was cut between President Clinton and Bob Dole. Bob Dole did not want Perot in the debates in 96 because of what was mentioned. They felt he'd siphon off Republican votes and would ensure Clinton winning. Clinton didn't want debates at all because he was so high in the polls, the only direction he could go was down. So here's the deal that was cut. Clinton went along with Dole, cut out Perot, and in exchange, Bill Clinton got to name how many debates there would be and when they would take place. Now, bear in mind, he didn't want debates. He had nowhere to go. So what happened? You had 2 presidential debates in 96, and they were held the same night as the World Series.
But let me ask you, let me ask you.
92 had the largest audience. 92 had the largest audience in presidential debate history in modern times. 96 had the lowest. So you went in 4 years from the most highly visibly watched debates to the lowest debates in 4 years. Why? Because these two parties got together and eliminated any third party involvement. And let me add one other thing. Ross Perot got 29 million of your tax dollars because of the 92 election, and in 96 he had that money of your tax dollars, and you were not allowed to hear him. You were not allowed to hear him.
And there's
$29 million.
There's more.
I know.
We have the whole hour and a half. There's going to be plenty of time to get into
I'm
more.
just off the top of my head. Now we'll go to the people that got it written down.
Well, here's my question about this. I think that third parties have actually played a valuable role in American politics throughout history. Some parties have been single-issue parties. I think particularly of the Liberty Party and the Free Soil Party, which really brought emancipation and really put slavery on the agenda, and then, of course, turned into the Republican Party in 1856. A lot of third parties have been single-issue parties, and they've been powerful in putting an issue that the two parties weren't addressing on the national agenda. Some of those we may not like. The Know Nothing Party was an anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant party. I mean, so some we like, some we don't. There have also been parties that really pointed out real economic divisions within the country. The Greenbackers, the Populists in the 1800s, they talked about money and the gold standard and things like this and created a debate. There have been third parties that have broken off from the major parties when the major parties were not coping with some big problem they had internally. And of course, one of the most famous is the Progressives in 1912, which broke away from the Republican Party really on a good government reform agenda, because the Republican Party at that point was quite corrupt in a lot of deals. So I have great respect for the role third parties have played in American politics, and I think that they're important. I have a problem with the Reform Party, because I can't figure out what Ross Perot, Pat Buchanan, and Ralph Nader have in common. I don't know what that party is that Nader's getting on the ballot for. A party that had Pat Buchanan on it, that had Ralph Nader on it? I don't get it. And I don't see the Reform Party particularly as fulfilling any positive role at all in American politics, because it's become just a legal vehicle through which anybody who decides that they're going to be this election cycle's third party candidate gets in. And I don't think that's what third parties are about. And I don't think that they should be afforded that, what with the historical role of third parties, which is to put real issues on the table. I'm sorry, I cannot understand the appeal of a party that has Ralph Nader and Pat Buchanan in alternate years on its ballot. Just don't get it.
Well, because,
Let me explain.
Because the party...
Obviously, out of fairness, I'm going to need to let Teresa have a shot.
Well, let me explain, because the party deteriorated. The party, I was a member of it, and I saw the party become not a legitimate third-party movement. It could have been. It was there.
Yeah.
But Perot's ego got in the way.
So why should we support it? Why should we care?
Well, let me ask you this question. I'm fiscally conservative and I'm socially liberal. Tell me who I vote for.
Yeah, you should probably vote for John Kerry. That's exactly
Really? And so...
Elaine's going to say that no matter what.
I should vote. What you're telling me is I should vote to have Kerry raise my taxes. I already pay 50%, but that's not enough.
John Kerry's the
pay more than 50.
He's the only person talking about deficits.
Let me let Teresa have a shot at this real quick.
Well, the Reform Party is the fourth largest minor party in the United States of America. And if you take a look, they have registrations in all kinds of different states. The fact that the third party can ebb and wane over the course of its history doesn't mean anything. Look at the Democrat and Republican Party, how they have lost registrations over the last several years. So the question is, though, what do they have in common? Which of the two major parties is standing up against NAFTA and the WTO? Neither one. What has the Reform Party sound? Starting with the giant sucking sound of Ross Perot, warning about NAFTA and the loss of jobs. Pat Buchanan believed in that.
Teresa, why did Clinton add 23 million jobs in the 90s if NAFTA was sucking so many jobs?
Well,
exactly.
You
how
asked
do you
the
make
question
those two
about
things
why
work?
can particular candidates be on a certain party line? Because the overlap in their platforms. Now, that doesn't mean everybody perfectly overlaps with any platform. The Democratic candidates and the Republican candidates do not perfectly overlap with their platform. Case in point, if you take a look at the Texas Republican Party platform, you're going to see at least 23 major differences with the Texas Republican platform and George W. Bush's policies. So historically, what happens is parties have a platform, they elect candidates or they nominate candidates that will be a standard bearer for at least some of those points and get out there and turn out the vote.
Now let's say
Jesse, let's go to the next clip.
I'll give you another comment. Campaign finance.
Yeah.
That brings all of us together because
Corporate
the Dems
reform.
and Repubs are identical. They believe in a system of bribery.
Corporate reform.
Let's
we can go down the laundry list for Elaine's benefit.
I don't mean to cut you guys off. You're doing a great job, but we have several clips that might add to the conversation. We'll see. If not, we'll come right back to you.
I'm Michael Anthony Perutka, and I am hoping to be the candidate of the Constitution Party for the presidency of the United States. It's a distinct honor and blessing to be able to be in this position. It's a great opportunity, and we're really looking forward to a terrific adventure. The Constitution Party stands for really what the founders stood for, which is that there is a creator God and that our rights come from him. And the purpose of government then is to secure and protect and defend those God-given rights. If man's law is in harmony with God's law, then it's not law. It's void. It's the empty set. After God, family is the jurisdiction that we talk about in our campaign, and it's very, very important to defend the American family. Okay, so the ungodly are not so or not.
Just some background on the Constitution Party, because a lot of people haven't heard of it. A lot of people think that it has to do with the Constitution. It's a misnomer. The Constitution Party represents the far right of the Christian right. It was founded in 1992 as a vehicle for Pat Buchanan. That was going to be Pat Buchanan's party. Buchanan decided to enter as a Republican in the famous Read My Lips campaign, and then in 1996, the Constitution Party was able to steal Senator Bob Smith from New Hampshire away from the Republican Party. Bob Smith renounced his Republicanness, if that indeed is a word, and for 3 days he was the nominee of the Constitution Party, which was actually called the U.S. Taxpayers Party. It gets very confusing. For some reason, something happened in the back rooms where some threat was made, apparently, and Smith went right back to being a Republican. So that never panned out. And this year, I don't know how many people are familiar with Judge Roy Moore, the Alabama Supreme Court Justice who fought to have the Ten Commandments in his courtroom. He was seen as the candidate this year, and again, the Constitution Party failed to get their celebrity candidate. Just a little background, and now you guys can attack.
Well, I was given a question to ask you. I'm not sure it's even necessary. But the question sort of is that here's an example of a party that would appear to appeal to a major segment that is probably today voting for President Bush, the Republican Party. It's not clear at all that it's getting anywhere in that very strong and clear commitment that they have on their religious principles. On the other side of the political equation, we have the Green Party, which over the last several elections has been taking votes away from the Democrats. And the issue sort of is that because the Republicans are better at keeping these people in their party, and the Democrats are not? Is there anything you see, or what do you predict for this fall in part on that issue? Elaine, do you think the Green Party is going to?
I think that, the Green Party had success last time. I think that it will not be very successful this time at all, because I think a lot of people who deeply believe in environmental principles will look at what happened when Bush got in the White House, the closing of the roads up to the logging sites, the complete reversal of lots and lots of environmental regulation. And one of the things I think Americans have learned in the last 4 years is how much environmental regulation, important things in the environment, come from essentially what are executive actions. Congress has really very little to do. There's so much is important in rulemaking. And almost every single significant environmental rule of Clinton's second term has been repealed by this administration or is in the process of being repealed. So I find it hard to believe, given what is at stake, that if people really, really care about the environment, that they would risk electing George Bush again, since he has been so incredibly detrimental to the environment, particularly compared with the two Clinton terms.
We don't have a representative of the Bush campaign here, so you'll have to forgive us. We assume through everything else you'll hear about that.
I just love the standard ploy used. Well, you got to pick the lesser of the two evils, right?
I don't see what is lesser of two evils about an administration that was devoted to environmental principles.
For me, it's the lesser of two evils.
You tell me why,
because
Jesse.
I'm a centrist, and neither of these two parties represent central common sense America.
We're talking about the Green Party and Clinton. We're talking about the Green Party and the Democratic Party, and frankly, all right, so you're a centrist, big deal. I'm talking about environmentalists right now.
Well, you're a left-winger, big deal.
And I'm talking about, big deal. And I'm talking about environmentalists, and I'm asking a simple question. Why would somebody who believes and who cares about the environment run the risk of returning this administration to power?
Because
Why?
they're all controlled by the almighty dollar of the lobbyists.
Come on,
right.
Jesse.
That's
Such a
Come on.
such horseshit.
Who do you think
come
talks
on,
to these
Jesse.
people?
That's
Who do you
honest
think
to
talks
God.
to these
But-
people?
Oh, come on.
You don't
What
have money,
almighty-
you don't get in
Excuse
the
me,
door.
What almighty dollar was out there when Bill Clinton put half of the state of Utah into federal receivership in Grand Escalante, the biggest preservation of the environment in 100 years? What dollar was that? There was no dollar, Jesse Ventura, and you know it.
Well, we can
Honest
talk
to
about
God.
there is a lot
So
of-
you're telling me Bill Clinton never took PAC money and special interest money?
I'm
That's what
saying
you're
it
telling
didn't
me.
impact his environmental decisions, and if you can show me one, I'll eat my hat.
Teresa.
Let's talk about
Let's
West
let Teresa.
Virginia. Let's talk about West Virginia. There's all kinds
How much
of
did he
things
get from the
where
Sierra Club?
Corporate money influences, and you have to be blind not to say that corporate money influences the outcome in Washington, D.C. It's corporate occupied territory. And to ignore that we don't do a good job at campaign finance. We don't do a good job of keeping big corporations out of Washington, D.C. decision making. If you think that the average citizen has the same kind of access that people who give thousands and thousands of dollars to congressional and federal and presidential campaigns, you're not living in 21st century America, because the problem of getting money out of politics has not been solved in this country. That's the first point. The second point, going back, is that the whole assumption of this question is that one of the two parties gets the voters, and that it's a zero-sum game. Well, guess what? There are a lot of people out there that don't want to vote for either of the two parties, and they're going to vote for the Green Party or Mr. Perutka's the Constitution Party, or they're going to vote for independent candidates, or they're going to vote for another party because they don't like the two parties. And so to assume that a third party or independent candidate is taking votes away, excuse me, you have to earn your vote. And when you have 80 million to 100 million people in the United States of America who are not voting, our problem is not too much democracy, it's too little.
Our next clip is going to carry on this issue of money. I just wanted to bring back to a, unfortunately, moderate kind of perspective on what I think that last clip might have indicated that happens to both the Green Party and to the Constitution Party is that one of the two big parties absorbs their issues or absorbs their interests in an effort to stay in power. And that is one of the reasons that third parties don't last over time, is because they do get their impacts. The Green Party, whether or not Kerry is as green as they would like, it's clear many of them are finding it tactically to be wiser to be on the Democratic side in this election. And very often, Jesse's correct. People are driven in the final hours of an election to say, what is the lesser of evils? I want to have an impact on the actual consequences of the election, and they tend to be driven to that.
So what you end
Whether
up...
they should do that or not is another question, Jesse, but that's what tends to happen historically.
What you end up with then is an election where you vote against someone rather than for someone.
There are millions of Americans that vote
what
that
you,
way.
Well, with the two-party system, that's what you end up with. You end up voting against someone rather than voting for someone. And as Jerry Garcia...
Your choice.
Remember what Jerry Garcia, the Grateful Dead, said, if you pick the lesser of two evils, it means you're still picking evil.
Well, or you can live in a convent. Yes. Let's go with the next clip.
Much as we might appreciate many of Ralph Nader's statements and his principles and all, we don't believe that he can be elected, and we believe that we must turn out the Bush administration.
I don't want Nader to draw any votes away from John Kerry.
They ought to concentrate on 8 million Democratic voters who voted for Bush in 2000, try to get him back.
Ralph Nader has done a lot of good things for the country. I mean, really a lot of good things for the country. And he has good ideas now. But the fact is, he can't win.
They're such whiners, carpenters. That's the sign of a decadent party. Instead of focusing on their own infirmities and their own abandonments, they're trying to go after a small political start.
Everybody has been downgrading Ralph Nader to the point that you have no chance, you're a spoiler, you're this and you're that. I'm saying Ralph Nader is the right person who could run this country into a new future that we so badly need. Between the Republican dictators to the right and the Democratic socialists to the left, there's a big gap in the middle that could be filled by Ralph Nader because he's an honest person, and I think he could be great for the United States.
Some quick background on this clip. This was taken at a house party in Princeton, New Jersey, at the home of Ralph Nader's treasurer. And what I found to be very classy was that the Nader people invited the protesters in for snacks, and that they had calm, pleasant debates inside the house party. And I was very impressed, Teresa, very impressed.
Well, I'm sorry, I was in error that this was not about the costs, which Teresa had started to raise in this, but this gets us to the issue at hand here in this election. What impact do you expect Ralph Nader to have? And maybe we should ask Teresa, first of all, what impact do you hope he's going to have? What is your goal in this election cycle?
Well, of course, we're running for president, and we decided to own the word spoiler this year, and we made a T-shirt that says spoiler, and it says revolutionaries always spoil corrupt systems. And part of running as a third party or an independent candidate is to highlight the flaws with the system, and it's to define winning in many ways. Usually the third party or independent candidate does not win the presidency. However, social agendas, political agendas, economic agendas are moved forward, and progress comes after 10, 20, 30 years. You build parties, you build movements, you build consciousness. So a lot of the things that you may have seen in Eugene Debs's platform or Teddy Roosevelt's platform end up in the New Deal. You move the agenda forward, and typically that is what's happening when you have successful third-party and independent candidacies. Once in a while, you get a Jesse Ventura in government, and you point out the flaws in the system, not just the Commission on Presidential Debates, not just the arcane ballot access process, but things like not making it easy for people to vote in this country, not having same-day registration, not making it easy to get voters out, and not having growing up citizens who are capable of participating in the process. In this country, you can get a sports score by dialing a 1-800 number anywhere in the country. Can you get your representative or your senator's record by dialing a 1-800 number? It's awfully tough. You have to grow up as public citizens to be able to participate in the process, and that's one of Ralph's key messages, on top of having corporate control and having corporate sovereignty replacing citizen sovereignty every day.
Elaine, you have a perspective on this election.
Well, I just want to ask Teresa how it feels to be a tool of the Republican Party.
Come
Michigan,
on.
everybody knows now, in Michigan, the Michigan Republican Party collected the signatures to get Ralph Nader on the ballot. In Florida, before the Supreme Court the other day, the Nader case was argued by a Republican lawyer who was part of Bush's 2000 team. This pattern is repeated across the country. The Republican Party, you don't have enough grassroots strength to do this, and you're relying on the Republican Party in those states, and they're doing it because they expect you to be a spoiler. Now tell me how that advances your goals.
I am so glad that Elaine brought this up, because I have an opportunity now to bust the big lie. This is the Democratic Party's big lie. You repeat it over and over and over again, and then it becomes truth. Well, let's talk about Florida. We just won there in the Supreme Court 6-1, even though Larry Tribe came and argued for the Democratic Party on the other side. Because who did we hire? We hired a lawyer. Do we have a political litmus test for a lawyer? Do you know who I called first, Elaine? The ACLU. But you know what? The ACLU didn't come to our aid in Florida, and they haven't come to our aid elsewhere. So who am I going to hire? I'm going to pay for my lawyers. No, we have Democrats defending us in Pennsylvania and in Nevada. We have independents defending us in West Virginia and in New Mexico. But this is what the Democratic Party propaganda is in order to turn all their attention toward stifling competition and the Nader campaign instead of focusing on who they should be focusing on, George Bush.
I don't think it matters if Nader gets Republican support at all, because the bottom line is if Kerry cannot intellectually crush Nader on the debate floor, he shouldn't be president.
Well, let's go back, though, to the idea of the bankrolling. Nobody ever talks about the Center for Responsive Politics did a study of all our donors. You know how many Republican donors gave to the Nader campaign? 4%. And you know what was amazing about that? It was a total of about $55,000. And you know what was more amazing? The same people gave $66,000 to the Democrats. But the Democratic Party just keeps repeating the big lie and say, oh, you're a Republican tool. I think not. Ralph Nader has a record of 40 years. It has nothing to do with the Republican Party.
Well, with that, I'm going to seize the opportunity to go to the last clip, because we also want to get the audience into this conversation.
The United States is the only country in the world that doesn't have a national ballot access law. We let every single one of the 50 states write its own rules. We have states like Tennessee that only require 25 signatures for an independent candidate to get on the ballot. And then we have California, which requires 150,000 signatures for an independent candidate to get on the ballot.
How you doing, sir? Hey, I'm doing a petition drive to give Ralph Nader the right to be on the ballot in Texas.
50,000 signatures.
We have 3 events going on today. There's a science fair, a library bargain book sale, and a gun show. And so what it's done, it's provided us with a very nice mix of people. Hey, how are you doing? Hi, man. I'm doing a petition drive to give Ralph Nader the right to be on the ballot in Texas, give ourselves more than 2 choices for president. Sure. You can support that, right? Here, do you want me to hold your books for you? The whole issue of electoral choice cuts across so many demographic lines, but I've had just as many people sign from the gun show as I have from the science fair. It's about the same response. I'm doing a petition drive to get Ralph Nader the right to be on the ballot here in Texas. And give us more than 2 choices. Nope, I'm a Bush person. All right, enjoy your book. The best thing that you can do is be proud of what you're doing, look somebody in the eye, smile, and assume that they're going to care about it.
One of the big hurdles, as this points out and as our guests have already pointed out, is the issue of how do you get on a ballot, and which is determined at the state level in this country at this point. And I guess my question is should we federalize it and make one national rule and overcome 200 years of states' rights on this issue? And secondly, many of us believe we should have a better system of ballot access, and yet we also know that you can have, like California, where you had a governor's race of 135. So I guess what I put to you and Teresa is, what threshold would you set as a reasonable proposition so that we actually have some reasonable choices?
What do Democrats and Republicans have to do to get on the ballot? Just be Democrats and Republicans?
Well, the parties have the ballot access, and they have to win the nomination.
So they don't have to gather any signatures. They're just automatically.
Depends on the state to state how you can run as a Democrat or a Republican. But you're right. Once the established party is on the ballot, it's there.
Yeah.
But that's the way even for third parties in most states. The problem is the threshold.
You saw how tough it is to get signatures out there. What you don't see on the screen is how tough it is to find a place to gather signatures. And Teresa can better illustrate this than me, but basically some states won't allow you to gather signatures in front of the post office because the post office is considered a private corporation. You cannot go in shopping malls. With the death of the downtown in America, where do people gather? The shopping malls. You can't go to the shopping malls. So people that are struggling to get the signatures, they're just pushed and they're pushed and they're pushed from one side of town to another, and it's a really tough struggle.
And who makes up these rules?
Yeah, it's
who makes up these rules?
It's an arcane system. It's an arcane system, and I think that, and I personally have been out there collecting signatures to put Ralph Nader on the ballot. I collected in Washington, D.C. also to get a sense of what people faced when they were collecting petition signatures. It is an arcane, labyrinthine process. In some states, you have to have odd-sized paper, pink-colored paper. You have to have the signature here. You have to number this in this certain way. You have to have, the staples on the left side, the staples on the top. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous system. I do think it should be federalized. I think we're the only Western democracy that doesn't have a national ballot access law for federal elections. I think there's an excellent article in the Harvard Law Review a couple of years back that set out a model ballot access statute. I think it should be implemented immediately because it's part of the systemic obstruction for third party and independent candidates to get on. Because what does it do? In effect, it's a wealth primary, because it's a wealth primary for third parties and independent candidates, because either you have to find enough people who are willing to stand out there, and I don't know how many people have ever tried to get like their office to sign a birthday card. Okay, imagine having to collect 100,000 valid signatures. That means you have to collect 150,000 raw signatures, and if the Democratic Party is going to take you into every battleground state like they have with the Nader campaign, you have to collect double or triple the amount of signatures, because somebody is going to spend all their time trying to knock you off the ballot because they don't want to have competition in the United States. The process itself stifles more voices, more choices in the political process, and it's unfair.
Do you recall in that model statute, though, where the threshold is? Because I don't know, it doesn't sound to me like you're arguing that just anybody ought to be able to go sign up to be on the ballot as a 3rd, 4th, 27th, 146th party, and that there is a reasonable thing that most states have to deal with. Some are absolutely unreasonable. I don't disagree with you.
I think,
but the point is it becomes unreasonable for the voter if in fact the choices are just everybody there in the whole community.
Right. Although we saw, for example, I went to Florida with respect to the litigation there. Florida, you have 23 minor parties registered, and yet only 6 asked to be certified by the Secretary of State to be placed on the ballot. So it's not like you had a situation where you had the entire phone book on the ballot. The threshold might be too low with respect to the governorship in California, but maybe not. Maybe the way to do it is let people on and then have things like, you have debates where you narrow the process down by different criteria. There are a lot of civilized criteria that we could experiment with. The problem is the system is broken now, and I recommend a great book by Stephen Hill called Fixing Elections, and it talks a lot about the ballot problems in the United States.
Let me hit on the criteria for a moment. You know, how do you arbitrarily pull a number out of the air and say this is what it takes? I'll give you the example. When I ran in Minnesota, at the primary I was polling 10%. Now that would not allow me to debate in a presidential election. Now in Minnesota, in order to get major party status, you have to have 10% of the vote, and then you're established as a major party. And the point I'm making is that I was at 10% 7 weeks before the November election and won. Why? Because I was allowed to debate. Now, why was I allowed to debate? It wasn't because the Democrats and Republicans changed their colors in Minnesota and all of a sudden became inclusive and do the right thing. No, it was the same typical situation, except this time it was reversed to Nader. The Democrats felt because I'm fiscally conservative, I would take Republican votes. So therefore, the Democrats came out and said, we won't debate unless Jesse Ventura is included. Now, they didn't do that to be good. They did that to try to win an election, but ironically, it turned out the opposite. The Republicans stayed within the margin of error, about 32% the whole way, and never changed. The Democrat went from 46, dropped to 28. I went from 10 to 37 and won. So it was exact opposite of what these quote-unquote experts within the party said would happen. They said Jesse Ventura, because he's fiscally conservative and doesn't want his taxes raised, would...
You're rich, Jesse.
I'm not rich.
Yeah, you are.
No, I'm not. I just pay 50%. Right now.
Then you're rich.
No.
Then you're rich.
Okay. What do you pay?
Well, I'm going to...
Plenty.
Let's do this.
And you want to pay more?
No.
Sure.
Let's go to our microphones. There are 2 down here. There are 2 in the loges up there. If you'll please remember try to keep the questions very short, one question per person, because I suspect we'll have a number of you asking questions. And if you just very briefly give your name,
By the
if
way,
you're associated with one of the schools.
I was told in every debate, too, it was repeated at least 4 times in every debate that I was in, I couldn't win. The public in Minnesota were told that every debate, that Jesse Ventura can't win.
That probably helped, Jesse. Probably
did.
Actually.
I
Any questions?
I hope they always say that to me.
Yes.
All right. My name is Mike Rosenberg. I'm an MPP1 at Kennedy School. My question is for Teresa. How can you realistically, not idealistically, just realistically argue that your campaign is doing something better for the country when the actual result of your campaign will bring about an administration which your campaign itself contends will be worse for the country?
Can I take that? Why are you blaming her for what voters do? Why don't you blame the voter?
Well, why blame anybody?
My point is people vote
if you're
for
trying
Ralph
to bring
Nader
about a
because
certain
they
result,
choose him.
and the result you bring about is the opposite of that which you intend, then how can you contend you're doing something better for America?
Well, I disagree. It's going to be bring about the opposite result than that which we intend. And I think the premise is you're going back to the year 2000, and people just believe that for some reason, because it doesn't rest with the facts, is that Ralph Nader's candidacy cost Al Gore the election. That's not true. And there are a number of reasons that factored into why Al Gore lost, and
So-
I'm sure Elaine would even second that.
Is your contention that if Ralph Nader did not run for president in 2000, that Al Gore would have won the election? Or irrelevant?
I'm going to ask us not to get into a debate if you don't mind. We've got multiple
Because-
people asking questions.
Let me state something.
There are a
Had
number
Al
of
Gore
factors.
won his home state, he'd be the president.
Yeah. Not to mention, and Ralph mentioned it on the clip, the 8 million Democrats nationwide who voted for George Bush, which was unfortunately far more votes than Ralph collected in the year 2000. So the whole premise is you're starting that it's a zero-sum game, but almost every minor party received more than 537 votes in the state
just
of
take
Florida.
a crack at that?
Very quickly, Elaine.
You know, I don't think this will happen again. And I'll tell you that one of the things about 2000 struck me, particularly because it was before 9/11, is that in some senses it was kind of a trivial election. There was all this discussion about which candidate was nicer to drink beer with, and you know, it really, we had peace and we had prosperity. And I think that in presidential elections from now on, people understand that there are real issues of war and peace, there's real issues of equality and inequality, and I think that they will think twice before spending their vote in a way that might elect the person that they don't want to have it elected. I think that's changed.
That's why we're talking about hair and what happened 30 years ago in Vietnam.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Graham Bullock, one of the co-founders of the Independent Caucus here at the Kennedy School, which is a speaking group to foster more civil, respectful dialogue between Democrats, Republicans, and independents on trying to find solutions. Sorry about that. Solutions that work from all sides of the spectrum. And my question is returning to this theme of centrism and extremism in American politics. And I think it's probably fair to say that we have a representative centrist independent politics in Governor Ventura and extremist independent politics in Ralph Nader, at least as sort of popular perception is. And I think this is also related to whether we perceive America as red states and blue states, as extremely polarized, or more in the words of Barack Obama, you know, one United States, a unified United States with a silent moral majority who basically agrees on most things. And I'm wondering if you guys could comment on how you see America right now in terms of polarization. Thanks.
I see the centrists as lost, as I said. Everyone that's like me, who's fiscally conservative and socially liberal, we have nowhere to go with these two parties. I can't vote for either candidate. Not with good conscience. I can vote against one, but I can't vote for one out of these two. And I think all of us centrists are lost right now. Imagine, of course you can look at me and see I'm part of the radical center. And let me tell you why I do this. I stand for freedom. The freedom to look how you want, the freedom to feel how you want, and with no strings attached. There's not a Democrat or Republican in the nation that would come out of office and get a hairstyle like mine. Because they don't have the guts to do it.
Certainly not Ralph, who's no extremist. The big shock is 25% of his votes in 2000 came from registered Republicans.
My name is Daniel Coe. Governor, I was one of your liaisons.
How you doing, Daniel?
How you doing?
Good. Did you pass?
Oh, I did.
Doing good in school? I haven't been around to check on you now, so.
I'll try, Governor, for you.
Okay.
My question is about same-day voter registration, Governor. I know you told me one of the reasons why you knew you were going to win the governorship was that the lines were out the door for the people who were voting on the same day. I guess my question is to all of you, do any of you disagree with the stance that we should enact some kind of nationwide same-day voter registration? And if so, why? And do you think, if you are against it, if it's a limit on democracy or not?
I'm not against it.
No.
I'm for it.
No, I mean, I also think, the internet has really revolutionized a lot of things. You can do a lot of checking and verification more quickly than we ever could before. You can do same thing with reporting on campaign contributions. I don't know why we don't have simultaneous same-day reporting of campaign contributions. And I just think our election machinery is way out of date. And of course we should be able to do this, and we should be able to build in safeguards against fraud as we do it.
Let me add too that all results have shown that states with same-day registration, there's no more voter fraud than states that don't have it. So if they use the argument that if you have same-day registration there'll be more voter fraud, that's false, because the statistics have proven that wrong, that there's no more fraud one way or the other, whether you're allowed to register the same day or whether you have to jump through hoops and make voting difficult.
I find it outrageous that after our experience of 2000, that we have not made a much more aggressive effort, maybe statewide, but certainly coming with federal leadership in terms of a whole series of these kinds of issues, and it's a pathetic proposition if we're committed to a democracy in this country.
I was just curious as to why you think that maybe that hasn't been a more standard thing or a more prominent issue in American government right now.
Well, because then third-party people have more success.
Right. I'm not sure that they would necessarily.
Oh, yes, they do.
To be honest with you.
Oh, yes, they do.
I think what you'd find is a big response from the two parties.
I think the actual answer is that in state by state.
My answer wasn't actual?
No, your answer was not actual.
And how many times have you been elected?
None. But I would say that in state by state, what tends to happen is that the Democrats and Republicans are gaming this. In other words, one party thinks, oh no, we can't do that because the other party will get an advantage. I think it's a lot less about third parties than Governor Ventura here would have you believe.
Thank you.
Even though, as was stated, when Governor Ventura ran, the lines to register were longer than the lines to vote in Minnesota. But that means nothing.
I don't have any doubt that you're right, Governor, about your election and those circumstances. I don't think that's any doubt. The issue is over time, what happens, how parties and candidates respond. And if we're going to get in this business, I was in 24 elections and won 22 of them. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Liz Marquez. I'm an MPP1 student from Minnesota. And I have a question for Governor Ventura, actually, about the last gubernatorial election in Minnesota, in which there was a very strong third-party candidate, Tim Penny, along with a few other actual candidates from smaller parties. And my question was, going into that election, it looked like some of the third-party candidates had a pretty good chance, and then come election day, Tim Pawlenty basically took an overwhelming percentage of the vote. And my question there was, what happened there? Third parties were doing pretty well.
What happened, and I'm not making excuses, but what happened was 48 hours before the election, the media came out with a story stating that Penny was falling, that he was finished. And when the media does that to you 48 hours before an election, you can have results like that. And basically that's what they did. They did a huge story with a phony poll that said he had fallen out of the race and didn't have a chance 48 hours before the election.
Sorry, I kind of lost track of the rotation here. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Noah Sawyer. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. My question is for Ms. Amato and Governor Ventura. In history, third-party candidates have gone on to sort of influence the platforms of the major parties. And I was wondering if, in either the 2000 election or in your election, Governor Ventura, if you see any lasting legacy on either of the major parties in sort of the issues that you campaigned on.
Well, for me, it was the opportunity. I guess the lasting impression I got was the opportunity to show that I'm the only person in America that can bring the Democrats and Republicans together in bed. Because I saw it my last year. I watched the Democratic and Republican parties unite to go against the moderate center. And I was cut out of the budget process the last year where they ignored me completely as a governor and they did their own budget. And that's the example, the best example I can give you right there of one thing that happened. It showed me clearly that these two parties, their main focus above all else is to not let anyone else into the game. And they will work together unbelievably well to accomplish that. And I feel bad that they wouldn't take the same type of perspective with many other issues as what they do with simply a third entity entering an election.
Yes, I would say that a number of the things you heard Howard Dean say and Dennis Kucinich and Al Sharpton say were things that Ralph said in 2000 that were given a voice in part in the Democratic primary this year by those candidates. Also, take a look at the Green Party. You know, this is not a fair representation of all these so-called party crashers. There are a lot of minor parties in the United States. Today, the Green Party is the fastest growing party by registration. The Libertarian Party routinely gets on 49 or 50 ballots, so depending on how you measure success, there are a number of successful third parties out there. They're running candidates. Darren's documentary has a number of them in them, and you know they're not here voicing what they have done, but Ralph did a lot to help grow the Green Party from a party that was not even a political party. It was an association of state parties into a national party that went from 13 ballot lines to 23 ballot lines and has the fastest growing registration in the United States.
And just a reminder, if this discussion tonight interests you, next Thursday night, 8 p.m., WGBH2, as the lead-in show of the first Bush-Kerry debate, you'll see all the parties that will not be in that debate, crashing the parties.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, go ahead.
My name is Michael Atik. I'm a Boston resident, and I have a website, M-EEK, the first initial of my name and my last name. And I have, my slogan is an end to the Democrats and Republicans. And I pass out business cards around here in Boston. And I also say that God wanted war with America and why and how we can improve it. And I'm just wondering if anybody's heard of me since I've been doing this for a long time, since 1987.
I don't live in Boston.
I am a Boston resident, yes.
I'll address that. There are hundreds of people, of civic-minded people like you across the country, active in their own cities that have a particular cause, one or another, that have been active for years and years and years. Just from our perspective, we chose to follow the people that have national movements, national grassroots movements. So if you expand it into a movement across the country, I'll be giving you a call.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Chris Beck, Kennedy School student from Oregon, the only state that has all-male balloting, which is sort of interesting.
M-A-I-L, right?
Pardon?
M-A-I-L.
Sorry, M-A-I-L. Thank you, Phil. I'm wondering if the problem is that neither of the two political parties right now has a significant enough majority to enact a lot of these meaningful electoral and campaign finance reforms that I think a lot of the independent movement wants. The Republicans have spent 50 years converting Civil War Southern Democrats to the Republican Party. The Democrats have lost numbers and really have done nothing to convert the Northern abolitionist moderate Republicans to the Democratic Party. I'm wondering if it's possible that Nader and other progressive independent voices are really trying to prod the Democrats to reorganize, to remake themselves, and build up a new majority, progressive, moderate, whatever it is, so that it's a working majority built around the environment, choice, fair tax system, balanced budgets, campaign finance, and other electoral reforms. I wonder if that's what really we need to go to. I know you won't.
No, I'm just saying that they're not going to do it.
No, that's true.
But Teresa, is that part of your
Yes.
goal is
Well,
to,
you
is
want
to
about it, they're
not,
not gonna do it.
I mean, whether it's not to create a third party or whether it's to actually force, in this case, probably the Democratic Party to become more
Right.
responsive to your issues?
In part, this is Ralph's book called Crashing the Party, and he wrote it after the 2000 campaign, and the entire beginning has nothing to do with the campaign. It has to do with the decline of the Democratic Party and his view, watching it in Washington over the last 3 decades, and profound disappointment with the Democratic Party to stand up for its basic constituencies. So in part, he has run to do that, but that's only in part, not the only reason.
Yes.
Hello, my name's Joe. I'm a student over at the Graduate School of Education. And we've been hearing a lot of rhetoric tonight about how this is a campaign about issues and that we don't want to talk about hair or a war that happened 30 years ago, but where are the issues? And I feel like, Teresa, you've been getting hammered up here in a lot of ways just because people are saying Ralph Nader's extremist or something else. And I think maybe a lot of people aren't familiar with maybe where he stands on some issues. Is there any way that you could quickly kind of highlight a few and just show people where Ralph maybe differs from either the Republican or the Democratic Party?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Ralph Nader has become an issue in the entire presidential election, and that's because competition and the ability for third parties and independents to actually participate in the electoral process has been challenged this year, and so he's become an issue. But of course, we have issues, everything from raising the minimum wage to getting out of the sovereignty-stripping WTO and NAFTA to health insurance for everybody, to having a decent job, to repeal of Taft-Hartley, to campaign finance reform. It's all on our website, votenader.org, and we'd like to talk about the issues if we were, most of the media likes to focus on the horse race, so always the question is, aren't you a spoiler? Aren't you just doing this to punish the Democrats? Aren't you just this, aren't you just that? Instead of talking about, we go to different states and we put out press releases every single day on the issues, not the fact that this is a horse race. But that tends to be the focus because we have a two-party mindset, despite the fact the word party is not in the Constitution. So people who want to raise the issues have to overcome that mindset and the media's predisposed focus of making it a horse race so that you can actually raise the issues and have people talk about the issues. And that's the important part of being included in the presidential debates.
I believe we only have time for 2 more questions, so let me take the gentleman up here and then this gentleman down here.
Thanks very much. My name is Mark Linton. I'm an MPP1 here at the Kennedy School. I wonder if you all could just discuss briefly if there's any one glass ceiling you have in mind that is keeping these third parties from really breaking through. I've heard suggestions that there may be sort of collusion between the two main parties. It's problems with the media. Is it also a money issue? And when you talk about that, I wonder if you would keep in mind Ross Perot's bid in 1992. He seemed in a way to have broken through, which suggested some combination of money and attention that he grabbed from the media. And the final part of that is, what's wrong with the rest of us who consider ourselves fairly well informed? We do the calculus and we still come down voting for one of the two parties. I've kind of heard that we're part of the problem, even though I feel like I'm not. I'm making the best decision I can.
Be happy to take that on. I think we touched on a number of things here, but the first problem is the electoral system as we have it. And that's why I mentioned the book Fixing Elections, because if you have a situation where you still have an electoral college, for example, that's deciding as opposed to the direct vote, you have a situation where people say, well, it doesn't matter if I live in a, quote, red state or a blue state. The majority of states are getting none of the direct mail, none of the attention from the two major parties, none of the advertisements, none of the messaging. They're not graced by the visits because they're assumed as foregone conclusions. And so elections become more and more narrow over the, quote, battleground states, and those folks get all of the attention. If you live in Ohio or West Virginia or Pennsylvania or any of the so-called battlegrounds, you're getting all kinds of attention from your presidential candidates. But if you live in some place like Kansas or North Dakota, you're not going to get that kind of attention. So first problem is the overall system. I think that needs to be fixed with the Electoral College and proportional representation and instant runoff voting. Those are two other things that we haven't talked about here at all. Same-day registration, more inclusion in the Commission on Presidential Debates, actually getting rid of that entity because it's bipartisan and not nonpartisan, and opening it up to a Citizens Debate Commission, and changing the ballot access laws, and making it possible so that you do not have to be a gazillionaire to vote, or to rather run for president. Article 2 of the United States Constitution, says you have to be 35, you have to have lived here for 14 years, born here, etc. It's not that you have to have several $1,000 million in order to be able to run for president, but that's what it's been turned into because of our campaign finance system.
I'd like to add, too, I think the key element here is the campaign finance end of it. When I was governor of Minnesota, I remember a Democrat, I was on the radio with him, and he accused me of not taking an active enough role in campaign finance reform. And I looked at the Democrat and said, in other words, you're asking me to come in and clean up your party? Because my party doesn't take special interest money, my party doesn't take PAC money, we control ourselves. We have a set of rules that we live by. But with the current financing of elections today, I mean, McCain-Feingold comes out, right? It's supposed to clean up campaign finance. What's the first thing the two parties do? They find a loophole and a way to cheat. It's the first thing they did. They all stood up in Congress and said, we're trying to help clean up our campaigns and clean up our government. They passed the bill, and the first thing they do is figure out a way to cheat. And where's our media? Why isn't the media pushing these people saying, why are you cheating? But yet you hear nothing out of our media on it, nothing. And so we as the third party, we police ourselves. We don't take the dirty money. And until you clean up the money, the third party really will suffer because of their integrity. They have integrity, but they'll suffer because of it.
We haven't focused here with any voice that is a strong defender of the two-party system, but I just think we should recognize that there is a history of literature about the strength of that in both the United States and the Great Britain, suggesting that these are critical to the political stability of these two of the world's greatest democracies, and suggesting that the Third and Fourth Republic of France, the Italian republics, went through enormous instability as they turned over premierships one after another. Now, there are many factors that go into these kind of things. All I'm suggesting is that the picture may not be quite that simple, and you may not be so far off. One might ask about Ralph Nader, one might ask about H. Ross Perot, that perhaps some people are concerned that they've never served in public office, never had to deal with multiple constituencies, and build coalitions to make decisions that are acceptable in our political system. That is not to say, I'm not debating with you about there's some intense procedural issues that we in America really ought to deal with, whether it's on voting or on ballot access and these kind of things. But there may be other reasons that the American electorate chooses not to go with some of the third party candidates and proposals.
Well, I'd just like to add, I remember I was on Larry King with Senator Alan Simpson, who used to head the Kennedy School right here. And the senator was expounding, as you did, the great the great two-party system and how well it serves us here. And I remember I sat quietly, and Larry King finally looked at me and said, "Governor, how do you feel about it?" I said, "I think the two-party system's terrific. It gives us one more choice than communist Russia had." And Senator Simpson
that is
had no
a
response.
huge difference, ladies and gentlemen.
No, it
That is a huge difference.
Not much.
Boy, you don't know anything about history if you don't think that makes a difference.
Not much
Also, a key issue is whether the two parties are internally open to change, and that is critical, and it varies from state to state, both in terms of procedures and where we are historically. At one given moment or another, one of them is terribly tied down and totally boxed up, and the other one may be more open. And it shifts back and forth historically. That is not to defend against everything you've said. It's just to say, let's not be ready to totally believe the whole system is ready to collapse. Well, our last question, pardon me.
Hello, my name is Erdin Beshimov, and I'm a student from Kyrgyzstan. And my question is just...
Oh, something happened. Maybe you can just speak up.
Right. Does it work now? Okay. There are cases when a leftist radical party would come to power and start gradually toning down its rhetoric, forgetting its obligations and becoming more like its opponents. And my question to you is, why do you think that happens? And if, say, let's imagine one day you win a big important office, what would you do to stave off this danger?
I think I understood the question as if a leftist party comes to power that they forget their obligations to the left. Was that true?
Yes, well, for example, let's look at the Workers' Party in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
It came to power on a clearly socialist platform.
Or the Green Party in Germany, and I think there is a difference between being an outside the system voice and inside the system and having to compromise and rule. And so what happens, I think that you're emphasizing, is typically that you end up having a constituency that's much broader than just your political party because you're in power.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, our time is up on a subject that obviously is of intense interest, not only in this election, but is a very serious one for our country as well as in other countries. We will hope to have additional possibilities sponsored by the IOP to discuss these kind of questions. We appreciate your interest, and we hope very much that you will take seriously your obligations to be a good citizen. Thank you for being with us. Thank you.